Good Friday, really? Okay. Shoot.
Hey, Donna.
Hi there, Zachary.
Hello.
Hi there, Thomas. Okay. Hi, Melissa.
Hi. I'm
We'll
in
wait
my,
a minute or two to see if anybody else jumps on.
okay. I'm at lunch on my PSA pricing strategy analysis certification course here. It's Medra. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. All righty. If you have to jump off, Melissa, don't worry about it, okay?
Okay, thank you.
All righty. So let me go back to sharing over here. Let me see if I can set this up. Nope, that didn't work either. All right, let's stop sharing. I got to find the right place. All right, there we go.
Donna, I have my video off because I look so bad today. So I think I'd rather just, keep it off and.
Oh, you don't want to scare us, Zachary?
Are you ready? I'll scare you here. Let me
Nah,
turn it
you're
on.
good. You're good. Woo! He's ready for Halloween.
I sure am.
Okay, way to go. All righty, let me get everybody back here so I can do this. Oh, hang on, I've lost everybody. All right, let me see if I can share this again. Hi, Sarah. There we go.
Hi, how are you this morning?
I'm good. Did you
Good.
get that offer submitted?
I did. We should hear back momentarily.
Good job, good job. Well, it's not like it's a whole lot of money. That was pretty cheap for 5 acres, actually.
Yeah, it's a beautiful 5 acres. They're making out too because it has a beautiful view.
Yeah, where I forgot to see where it was located.
It's in Hartzell, but it's like nestled right there between the two reservoirs.
Okay,
See the
cool.
mountains. It's really pretty. Yeah.
There we go. So, okay. All right, we're going to begin. Can everybody see this? If you could let me know that
Yeah.
everybody can see this.
I sure can.
Okay, dokie. Thomas, are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure because I can only see a portion of you guys.
Okay.
All right, this today is buy sell contract. And so we're going to give you all the documents you have to have when you have a buyer, okay? And these are all the documents that go into command. So your buyer document, broker disclosure to buyer, or your definitions of working relationship, your agency agreement, your buyer advisory, and any change of status, which means if I went from a buyer's agent to a transaction broker, then you use the document change of status. Most of the time we don't use it. It is rarely used, just to let you know. Now, once you go,
Donna,
yes,
I hate to interrupt, but really quickly, I just wanted to ask this.
sure.
Yesterday, so I'm so used to doing definitions of working relationships, just the solo sheet.
Yeah.
This brokerage disclosure to buyer, you
Or
guys want
you-
that instead?
No, you can use either one, but the brokerage disclosure is more of when you do like a for sale by owner,
Okay.
okay?
Okay.
Let me rephrase this. I like the definitions of broker relationship because it's a disclosure and we're disclosing that's what we're gonna be. Once in a while, you use the brokerage disclosure if you have like a for sale by owner. If you read that disclosure, it leans more towards a for sale by owner. Okay,
Thank
but you're
you.
good. No, you're good. What you did yesterday is just fine.
Okay, thanks.
All right, now we have, once the house goes under contract, we have your lender letter, which you should always have. Should have a printout of the MLS that where it says it went under contract. You have the realist information about the seller, which is 3 pages long. You have a counter, maybe, maybe not. Copy of the earnest money check and receipt. You have any objection and resolution. You have seller's property disclosure. You have square foot disclosure. You have any and all mend extends. You may or may not have source of water because many agents are lazy and they say it's in the seller's property disclosure. But if you're listing a property, it will require that. Closing instructions is another document where lazy agents won't create closing instructions. The closing instructions that you sign at the title company are not the same as the DORA has. So hopefully you can get it signed, but I'm not going to penalize you if you can't because it's the other side. If the house is a lead-based paint house and you have a disclosure, you do need it. You need a post-closing occupancy agreement. Very rarely do we use earnest money promissory note. And then if it's a new build, you will have an agreement for new construction or a FSBO. Short sales we haven't gotten into, but we probably will next year and we'll address that if you need it, or if you come up against one now, just call me. Then you go to command and commission request and fill that out so you can get paid at the table. And then after closing, you will get an email and you can put into the command the email that comes from the title company. You have a sold MLS and a copy of the checks and the distribution. Now here's the definitions of working relationship, and you can always explain all of these to your buyer unless you have a customer, and everybody gets explanation. Have everybody sign it and how you delivered it, those types of things. And this is your buyer agency agreement, and we start with, okay. The buyer agency agreement is in your CTME or your DocuSign. So you always check 2.1 because this is a multi-person office. You put in the name of your buyer. You need to ask the legal name of your buyer. In case you have a Bill who would be a William, you want to be sure you've got the right legal name and you ask for their legal name because this will auto-populate your contract. The Keller Williams Real Estate LLC will already be there. Your name should be there. Number 3, always put this in. It's 3.4, buyer's next principal residence, whether it being for multi-listing service, a FSBO for sale by owner, property, investment. You can also put land or a new home builder. That covers everything that you might show somebody or everything that you need to do. So you won't have to worry about going before a judge if it ever gets that far, or a mediator saying, hey, I covered all my bases, everybody's in here. So whatever kind of property the buyer is going to buy, you've got it covered, okay? So then we go down to 3.6, which is your beginning and ending period of your agency agreement. And that should be always at least 6 months, maybe 7 or 8 months now, because we're getting a little longer on finding property. There is more property to find, but at this point, there are possibly less product on the market. And we have less buyers sometimes too. This is a shift in the market. So this is leaning towards more normal market, which if you're going to sell a house is usually between 4 and 6 months. So now we have 3.8.2, yes, you will, or no, you won't extend it to the next day if it's a Saturday or a holiday or Sunday. Number 4.3.1.2, you always want to check because you are really a buyer's agent. You only represent this buyer. You don't really care so much about the seller except getting some information from them. So now we go to 5. These are your brokerage duties. You cannot change any of these. These are always there and you want to be familiar with them, but you don't have to memorize them. But because you check this box at the top here, buyer agency right here, you get 3 more additional duties and 6. And that if you're going to get fired, you're going to get fired on these duties: promoting the interest of the buyer with the utmost good faith and loyalty and fidelity, seeking price and terms that are acceptable, and counseling the buyer on the benefits or risk of the transaction. So now we go down to compensation, which is 7.1.11. Then it's 2.8 or 3, whatever you'd like to put in here. And then if there's any bonuses, put this statement in, uncheck the box other. Any bonuses or any greater commission should be paid to Keller Williams LLC at the time of closing. Now, if you get paid less than 2.8 or 3, you have to make a business decision per buyer. Do I want to ask that buyer to pay the difference, or I just want to take whatever is advertised? Because a lot of times you're going to see the advertising co-op to be 2.5, 2.6 or something like that. So you have to make a decision. What would you like to do? So now there you go all the way down. We don't do anything else in 7. We always go to 2.4.4. This is about the lease. And I put this in just to keep everybody honest. At the time of lease, I will be paid a leasing commission at the time of lease. Normally, I've never exercised it, but it's always good to put it in there. 7.3.1, and I always check this one. Buyer is obligated to pay if the seller doesn't. So if there's a problem with it, then you can negotiate that later, okay? So now you have a holdover period of 7.4. This means if I've shown you property, Mr. Buyer, and you go back and buy one behind my back, you're going to owe me a commission. It's hard to collect this, but it's always good to put it in here so you don't have to have a fight about making sure that buyer stays with you. However, if your relationship with that buyer deteriorates, then you always want to be sure that you can let him go. I don't want you to hang on to somebody who doesn't want to work with you, okay? Ultimately, though, you need to have a conversation with me. So then we go down here to 9. And no, you're not a party to any agreement. No, you have not received any submission properties to say, hey, these are where I went, okay, before you. So be sure you ask that question. Have you worked with another agent? Did they give you a list of properties that you have seen? Because you may end up losing commission if you don't ask number 9, okay? So 10, you have a right to fire a buyer, and the buyer has a right to fire you. It's not used very often, guys, but every once in a while, you're going to have a situation where you have a buyer who's just so difficult that you don't want to work with them anymore, and that's okay. So now 11 is pretty self-explanatory. You have 12 is brokerage at the time of the task will be performed. No special tasks at this point. Then you have to say on 12.2, how do you get your instructions to show these properties as per the MLS instructions? And where are you going to show? So you can put in here the Denver metro area. You can say Park County. You can say Colorado Springs. You can say Fort Collins. Those are all different MLSs. So if you don't have access to them, you really can't show it. It's very difficult. And that might be consideration when you especially go to the high country to refer it out to one of our offices in the high country. We have one in Frisco and we have one in Vail, in Edward, actually. 13, is you check does not have the buyer's permission to identify. Yes, you do. If we have your identity. So most of the time that's not used very often, but every once in a while it is for something quite special. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20 are really self-explanatory. Just read them over and be familiar with them. And in number 21 is additional provisions. You can put down, you have a transaction broker if you want, or you can say that you can say nothing. You don't have to put that in at this time, but you could say, I've got a transaction broker. Her name is blah, blah, blah. The phone number is X. We'll be handling all the paperwork and will be paid at closing by the selling agent. Okay. What's attached to this contract is the buyer advisory and definitions of working relationship. So your first email is going to be 3 things. And when I get to the bottom of this, I'll tell you. So now 23 all the way down to 28 really is self-explanatory. Everybody read it. And then our next document is the buyer advisory document that comes in from Damien, our in-house attorney. And you want to be sure that you kind of walk through each of these categories. You don't have to go into great detail, but wire fraud is real important. Disclosures and buyer's inspections. Source of water is important a lot of times to people. Stigmatized property, inspection results, surveys, short sale, home warranty, title work, special taxing is somebody, water and mineral rights, if they come with, most of the time they don't, but they might in a property that has acreage. And FERPA is Foreign National Act. You have to ask your buyer, or if you're a foreign national, in order to get a loan, they have to have a green card. So these are all things you want to ask. And that's the first. Now, when you sit down, these are the 3 documents that you have when you sit down to do your buyer consultation. You have the definitions of working relationship. You've got the buyer agency agreement, and you have buyer advisory. Those 3 are the first documents that get signed by a buyer. Those should be, you should have a consultation before you go out with a buyer. You don't put them in your car and run them around. The 4th thing they need to have is have already talked to a lender, make sure their documents are in the lender, and because the more they can get done with the lender, the stronger the buyer they are. So again, those first 3 documents, or 3 things that you talk to about, 4 things you talk to the buyer about. Your buyer consultation is your lender letter, your buyer agency agreement, your definitions of working relationship, and the buyer advisory. So those 3 things, that's what you do in that first meeting. Then you go out and show property. Now we found a property. So now we're going to put a contract together. So we have the date. We have the buyer's legal name because we've already done that. We have to ask them, do you want to take this house in joint tenants, tenants in common, or other? Joint tenants is right of survivorship. Tenants in common, excuse me, is a percentage split, usually used in a second marriage. Others is usually a single person, and that is called severalty. So these 3 things you have to explain to a buyer to have them decide in advance what they would like to do. Seller's name comes from your realist document, and it will have their legal name. Then you have the county that the property is listed at on 2.4. It's in Douglas. Here's the legal description. Here's the address. Make sure that it is typed properly when you put your contract together. Now, what's included? These are standard boilerplate inclusions. And now we have solar panels and nothing else. So we're going to include those solar panels. We don't have what's excluded, what's not excluded, or what's not included You have exclusions, you have other inclusions, which would be where you want to put your freestanding gas stove, GE refrigerator located in the kitchen, the GE ice maker located in the bar in the basement. Be specific. The more specific you are, the less likely it is that things will walk out the door. Now, have you got any encumbrances which would be against that solar? And the answer is no, because the seller owns it. Okay. Personal property, any storage, 2.5.6. I have you put this together this way because in a house that has a 1, 2, 3 car garage or 4 or whatever it is, it's pretty self-explanatory. They have these garages and there could be a shed or any that convey with the property in 2.5.6. However, if you're dealing with a townhome or condo, you may forget to ask, and it may not be in the MLS, is there parking, reserved parking? Is there a parking space? Does it have a storage facility? So you want to be sure to ask these questions. And so when I ask you to fill out 2.5.6, this is the reason why. So now on the 2.5.7 is solar lease and panel are currently installed on property. Is it leased? If it is, you need to get a copy of the lease and make sure you have it to give to a buyer, a copy of one. Exclusions. Then if you're excluding whatever you're excluding, be specific. Water and washer dryer located in the upstairs laundry room or in the main floor or in the basement, wherever it is. Be specific. You have less likely to have problems if you're specific on everything. Now, let me talk about the deeded water rights. And describe the following, and it's none because there aren't any. But if it were, we'll talk about dates next week. But you have to be sure you understand. Anytime you say there's water rights or mineral rights, it takes 4 to 8 weeks for an attorney to review them. So you have to take that into consideration when you're writing an offer that has maybe water and mineral rights. So none at this time on this offer. And we go down to no rights, no certificates, no anything. So put the word none or go down at the bottom of your contract and click remove and hit save. And then that should remove all your NAs. And Sarah, did you check with CTME on why it wasn't removing?
No, I haven't yet, but I will, because I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I'm doing everything that you suggested.
Yeah, it's annoying, isn't it? Yes,
Yeah.
it is. Okay, so number 2.7.6 is we don't have the right to terminate on this and any water rights and reviews. So I'm not going to go through the dates and deadlines because that's next week. So now we go down to 3.3.3 and the deadline will or will not extend to the next day, which is not a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday. So now where price is $450, there is a $5,000 earnest money, and we're getting a new loan for $360. That should be in the lender letter that you've got. And they're putting 20% down. So cash at closing minus the $5,000 is $85,000. And both columns have to add up to the same number, guys. And on 4.2, we're not asking for any concessions, although I see that coming through on more and more contracts right now. And so sellers are willing to do that more than they were about 4 months ago. 4.3, it's a personal check for your earnest money. And in your MLS information, you'll find out who's going to hold that earnest money. It could be a title company. It could be all kinds of things, okay? So now you have on 4.3.12 and 3.2, that tells you what your deadline is and what your dispute opportunities are. And if you fail to deliver the earnest money on time, the seller could consider you in default. So all fours are dealing with good funds and availability on 4.4.3. You can check does if there is nothing to close sale. It's not a contingency sale. But if you check does and it's a contingency sale and the sale falls through, then it's called fraud. So be very careful which box you check, okay? So now we're going to what kind of new loan do we have to select? Please only select one. If you talk to the lender and say they could qualify for more than one, if you go from conventional to FHA or VA, there is cost involved that the buyer cannot pay. So you have to be sure you understand which is the best financial plan for that buyer.
Donna, I have a question.
Sure.
Going back to available funds, 4.4.3.
Yes.
Would you explain that again? You check does. If
Yes,
they
that
have-
means that I'm renting an apartment. I've got my money in the bank and I'm getting a loan, so I do have the money. If you don't, if you have a house that's under contract and you have a contingency closing on 10.7, that means you do not have the money because it's tied up in the house that's due to close.
So if you have a house to sell, U-Mart does not.
Correct,
Okay. If
because
you've
it's
got,
tied up
if you've got the money in the bank, U-Mart,
in your loan, and you do does. Does that make sense? Okay.
yes, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And again, we choose one kind of loan, choose one, have a conversation with the lender and determine what letter he's going to give you and which type of loan is he going to put on there. So you can take out assumption and seller private financing in CTME. I don't know if you can do it in DocuSign. I believe you can though. So number 5 is your new loan. I'm getting, and we'll talk more about this next week, your new terms, your new application, your new terms, and your new loan availability and how that, you have to be careful. It doesn't, buyer does not lose their earnest money on those, and we'll talk about that next week. So now we go all 5 deals with loans and getting your loan and all those. Number 6 is your appraisal. And it's the first one is dealing with conventional right here in 6.2.1. And then on your FHA on 6.2.2, if it's an FHA, whatever you put in paragraph 4 as the price you're going to offer, you also put it here in this little box right here with the $sign and right now it's 0. You don't have anything in the VA. You have to understand about the appraisals. VA appraisals are given out once every Monday from the VA. And they may give 5, they may give 10, but it's up to how many the VA wants to give. So if you didn't make it on that pile, you'll make it into the next one. Always put a date in FHA and VA loans just to keep everybody honest, but there's no control over either one of those really. But you want to put a date in to make sure we keep the lender honest. So now we go down to who's going to pay for the appraisal. Most of the time it's the buyer. Now paragraph 7 is dealing with HOAs. If the house you have has no HOAs, then at that point, it's not a problem. However, if you've got you're making an offer on a house that has HOAs, it's going to want everything in paragraph 7. Buyer does. And you have to make sure they get it. And then if you don't get it in time, they have 10 days to review before closing, period. So the closing can change if you don't get it done. When you list a property, always try to get the seller to pay the $150 for the title company to do that because it makes sure that everybody's compliant. 8 is dealing with the selection of the title company. If I represent the buyer, I always check 8.11. And because that's there's an $1,800 to $2,200 cost to the buyer or seller, excuse me. But if you check 8.2, then this is an additional $1,800 to $2,200 to the seller. To the buyer. So if the buyer's buying and he or she doesn't have a lot of money and you checked, I want to select, you've just cost them a whole lot of money. Okay. And sorry guys, I forgot to mute this. Hang on just a minute. So anyway, the, you want to be sure if you represent a buyer to ask the seller to select and they pay. The buyer will get their own title insurance that goes to the title to the lender. And that's about $1,500 to $1,800. So then you want to always check will on extended. If you don't, it could create a problem. What it means is the day before, the day of, and the day after closing, there will be, the title company will look at the property, make sure nobody's stuck anything in there that shouldn't be there. So it's real important that you do this. It's only about $35, and it's super important for you to put this in here and make sure. I always put the seller if I represent the buyer. So this is 8 is dealing with title documents, and I'll always read through those, but they'll get them and they need to look them. The record title, off record title is things that you can go, the buyer can go and see that might not be real visible to a buyer if they were looking at. Could be a vacant land, who's buying, what's going on that vacant land. It's usually plotted out already, and they can call the county and check that out. But anything that would be out of the ordinary, you want the buyer to check and make sure they fall into those deadlines. Then special taxing district is on your tax certificate, and that will come with your title company, your title commitment. January is the hardest month to get this, but they're the same date, so you have to make sure you try to get it. And whatever title company you're working with, hopefully they will give that to you on time. Tax certificate is going to be paid by the seller. It's about $25, and they need to know what that certificate has on there and what their taxes are going to be. Buyers want to know those things. So 8, 6, 8, 7 basically are dealing with third party, which we don't do, and the right to object to title, which you can do. So 871 is resolution. You're going to resolve something, or if you're not, the offer will terminate under title objections. Then we have title advisory. Those are documents that the title will give you with certain things that would be on there that might be objectionable to the buyer. 8 is dealing with leases and oil leases and gas leases that are more prevalent in the east, in Delbert, Albert, and eastern Douglas County. So now on 8, 9, you have mineral rights. Will you review or does not have a right to terminate? This, if there is mineral rights that convey, again, please remember, it takes 4 to 8 weeks for a mineral attorney to review the rights that are there and examine whatever is that might be. So when you're writing an offer, you have to understand, you can't say, I'm going to close this in 30 days and have a mineral right or water right review, because it's not enough time. And about 4 to 8 weeks is what they're running right now. And so you want to verify that by calling a water attorney and a mineral rights attorney. New survey. If you have a townhome or a condo, you don't have to fill out any information here or any dates. You want to be sure you have a house, lot and block, or acreage, and you fill this out. It could be a certificate. It could be a new survey. It just depends on a lot of factors. ILC or new survey could be paid by the seller, which I would ask them to update it. You can always ask them to update something. And then who's going to pay for it again? It'd be the seller. And who has the new delivery of those items would be to the buyer's lender. So now 9 is dealing with your surveys and how it terminates and things of that nature. 10 is you can have any kind of inspection you want. And number 10.2 tells you that the property is being sold as is, where it is, and with all faults. Again, you can have any kind of inspection you want, as long as you don't destroy your house. Then you put together, and we'll talk about that next week. Well, inspection objections and We want, or termination. It's one or the other. It isn't both. It's one or the other. You put the dates in there for both, but you can only submit either termination or an objection. Then you resolve it. If you don't resolve it, it'll die a natural death and everybody gets their earnest money back. So have to be sure to give them enough time to go through that. You do not upload to command until you've passed your inspection resolution deadline in a contract, because before that, it just creates too much paperwork for everybody. And then you have damages and insurance 10.5. Please make sure your buyer understands to get that quote for their insurance quickly and early, because they could live in a floodplain and they don't know it. That house may be in a floodplain and nobody knows it. And it's very expensive. It could add $228 or $30 a month to their monthly payment if it's in a floodplain. So always get that insurance squared away as soon as you can. Due diligence, you may or may not have anything to ask. You can always say, you know, the lease may, lease agreement for the panels have another 15 years to lease, and they're going to be looked at, and they may or may not assume that. They may assume it, they may not. What's the incumbents? Can I do it? There's a lot of factors to look into it when you're looking at the encumbrances, okay? So in this case, I said, yes, they will assume, as long as the lender knows that it's going to happen and doesn't throw their ratios off. And if you don't like some of the due diligence documents, you can object and you can terminate on that. 10.8 says you're not acknowledging the seller's property disclosure and there's no well. If there was a well, then you can get a permit number in another section for the water. So 10.9 and 10.10 is lead-based paint existing modifications. Most of the time in lead-based paint, everybody signs the document. There's an $18,000 fine if you don't, to all parties, and the office does not pay for that if you screw up. We don't have a carbon monoxide per se a document. However, there must be, when it's listed, carbon monoxide detectors in bedrooms that are 15 feet within every bedroom. And I would just suggest, if you list something, to be sure they put them in before it goes on the market. We don't have a meth disclosure. Some companies do, we don't, but some people do. So it's okay for the buyers to sign that if they want to. Estoppel statements basically are statements saying, if this is a rental property, this buyer, this tenant has paid their rent, and you can see the history of the payments. 12 is dealing with closing documents, and closing instructions are or not executed with this contract. 12.3, the listing agent is always the designated closing. Hour and place of closing will be designated by the listing agent. Listing agent controls all issues of this listing. So 12.4 and 12.5 about leasing, a settlement disclosure and lease situation. How are you going to transfer title? By special warranty deed. It is the only one you check. You do not check general. Once in a great while, it's personal representative if it's an estate sale, but 99.9% it's always special warranty deed. 14 and 15 are pretty self-explanatory here. 15 is dealing with your information about taxes and things like that. So closing, there is a closing fee. Your closing fee is charged half to the buyer and half to the seller, which is a fair thing to do. And because they close the seller side first, then the buyer side. And then if there's an HOA, we're dealing with who's going to pay for the letter, who's going to pay for the change of recording. And if there's an assessment, who's paying for it? Any other fees, who's paying for it? 15.4, we don't have a local transfer fee, but if you want to put seller, that's okay, or NA. We have that up in the high country, but we don't down here. Sale and usage tax, seller or NA is fine. Private transfer tax is seller or NA, that's also fine. 15.7, you want to be sure to put $350 in check water district because there is a fee. Some water districts are charging it now, some haven't, but it could be there and you don't want to have to go back and renegotiate who's going to pay, and that would be seller. There could be a utility transfer fee and you want a seller, buyer, 50-50, whatever works for your client. FERPA is if the seller is a foreign national and taxes have to be paid at closing for the seller, by the seller if they're a foreign national at time of closing. And the same thing with the 2% withholding tax for Colorado for a seller. They have to pay that at closing. They may or may not, but most of the time they will be charged for that. Now your prorations, you have taxes. I always check most recent mill levy and most assessed value and make sure that that's a fair thing for all parties involved. Now we have rents and this doesn't have any rentals. You have other probation, and please remember 16.1.3, always put after the word and the word none. If you don't, one of our agents got caught. They didn't put anything in there. They left it blank and it cost them $7,000. So please remember to put none after the word and. That way they can't charge you for anything else. It's a final statement on a lot of the things that are provided in this document. And you have association. Any special assessment prior to closing, the seller is going to owe. And again, after no exceptions and the word none after the word and, that way your buyer does not get charged extra for things. Because there are certain companies that want to charge the buyer about $295 for a closing fee, and they can't do that if you make sure you've got this spelled out. Now we have the possession. The seller is not going to be done for closing. You might have post-closing occupancy, or if they're not out, you got to charge a certain amount per day. I make it real painful for the seller if they don't get on time, whether it's a post-closing occupancy or not. Now, this little box here, if this box is checked, buyer and seller agree to exercise the post-closing occupancy agreement, put that with your offer and submit them both at the same time and go through that. I think I have one in here that has that. So basically 18 is a walkthrough. What happens if there's water damage and things like that all the way through 18. You're entitled to a walkthrough prior to closing. You can ask for a home warranty if you want, and make sure I would always ask for one in the inspection objection. 19 through all the way down to 28, I think it is. Yep, 28. Are pretty self-explanatory, and what happens, everybody has to act in good faith. Or there could be lawsuits involved. 29, I always put this statement in for my transaction coordinator who will be handling paperwork for the selling agent and will be paid at closing by the selling agent. So the selling agent, me, I'm paying for all of this at closing. It's a tax write-off. Okay, number 30.11, what goes into the contract here? It's earnest money, source of water addendum, seller's property disclosure, closing instructions, lead-based paint if it applies. Now, what Sarah did yesterday, didn't have a lot of, she only had earnest money, and I forgot what the other one Sarah was, but anyway, she only had 2 because it's a vacant land, doesn't have anything. So, but house will have these pieces of information for it. 30.2 is not part of the contract, but it has square foot disclosure is included. And then you go down to the bottom and you always want to check, you didn't get your earnest money yet because you haven't got, the date hasn't come that you need it. Your buyer's agent, you're getting paid for the listing brokerage, all of your information in here. And by the way, this is the company license number. Your signature and everything, whether you use CTME or DocuSign, should already be there. And let's help the other agent out because most of them don't fill this in properly. So we want to make sure the only thing they have to do is their signature. So it's does not hold the earnest money. They're acting as a seller's agent. They're going to be paid by the seller. Make sure you put as much information here as you can. So the only thing they have to do is sign. It won't create a problem for them. Any questions so far?
I do have a question. I did, what you were talking about was I put in the property disclosure, but there is a piece on there for what could have been used for vacant land. So that's what
No,
That's
you
what
did what you did yesterday.
okay. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you did fine, because there is a seller's property disclosure for vacant land.
Okay.
So no, what you did yesterday was fine. Okay, so now we've got, if you need an amend extend, this is where you've got this one. And if you need to terminate or extend, it might be a toss of the coin. There is this one. If you're going to do a post-closing, this is one that you can do. It gives you all the information. That there's the date of the contract, a possession when they can have it. You're closing on a certain may retain possession till whatever time. It only goes to 60 days out. You can't do any more than that. 8 is if you're going to charge something per day. 0 or will not prorate. So it could be $75. It could be nothing. It just depends on what your buyers want to do. If they are vacating the premises, make sure it's $500 and matches your contract. Water and sewer is changed over, but basically the buyer's going to end up with this one, even though I checked seller, because it's prorated at closing. But it's not a lot of money, usually, I'll put it that way. Gas and electric could be staying with the seller, and then it can be changed over at the time that you're taking possession. This 13 is the most important paragraph in this whole document. The seller will get renter's insurance, and you make sure that you put into additional provisions in this document to provide proof 3 days prior to closing. When we get there, I'll show you. There'll be a deposit anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000, and then you'll get it back. Then you have additional, the buyer and seller will exchange the keys and garage door opener on blank day at whatever time. Make sure you're absolutely specific on this because there's too many fights right now. Hang on just a minute. Too many fights now that they don't know when they're going to get the keys or the garage door openers or who's doing what. Be specific. What day are the buyers and sellers going to do that? Are they going to exchange the deposit money at that time? What are they exchanging on that day? And you can put in here regarding paragraph 13, sellers are to furnish proof of renter's insurance 3 days prior to closing. And then everybody signs. And this document goes with the offer. Now, if you have a title objection, this is the document you use. What are you objecting to? The due diligence, whatever it may be. And you can either withdraw it or you can go forth and everybody resolves the title issues. If the appraisal doesn't come on time or on the value that all parties have agreed to, this is the document you use to object to it. And if you can't resolve, the contract will die. Okay, we did this twice. And at this, if you're going to sell a house that would be the that has a well and septic on it, this is septic use permit. You have to have the permit, and when you write an offer, be sure you explain who's going to pay for that permit. Seller will get it, but seller will charge buyer. So make sure when you make your initial offer that the seller will be paying for the usage permit and proof 3 days prior to closing. If you're going to sell your own property, you have to use, these are the 4 things that have to be done. Seller's property disclosure, you have to put a home warranty on the property. Buyers have to have an inspection, and you have to use the Colorado State approved forms. If you do not, if you use all those things and somebody ends up suing you, your most that you're exposed to is $2,500. That's your deductible. But if you don't use these things, then it's more likely that we will not be able to defend you. And if there's a well on the property, this is just a general checklist that's in the documents that the seller fills out and pretty much does the checklist and makes sure that we have everything that's good. If for some reason your buyer is going to terminate, you have to do it within your deadlines, and in what regard are you why are you terminating, okay? Send over, then who is the party that's terminating, the buyer or the seller? Usually it's the buyer, and they're the ones that sign. Other than that, you're good to go. Who has a question? Anybody?
Maybe this is dumb, but I just am wondering, you know, the holdover period,
Yes.
how do you know, like, let's say the buyer decides to go find another broker or something like that. How do you know? At that point, do you
Well-
just have to keep on top of that, or just, it is what it is?
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you yes. I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't.
Okay, I was just curious.
No, it's very hard, honestly, to keep track of it. But if they're no, you know, if you keep contacting and there's crickets, that means they probably went somewhere else.
Yeah, true. Okay. Great. I gotta
Anybody
go.
else? Yeah,
Bye.
go, have fun. Anybody else have another question? If not, I will see everybody next week.
Thank you, Donna. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Okay, everybody have a great day.
Thank you, Donna. You too.
Donna,
Bye.
bye.